Okay, I think we're about ready to go. Okay, now something I wanted to do just for a bit of fun. Thank you everyone for joining me. I've got to see who's online now. I just stuffed up, moved my browser window. Oh, there we go. Okay, everyone's online. Now, just for a bit of fun. Now it's stuffed the image size. Hold on, I have to adjust that. But this image here I just took behind. I ran out of space to put the R2R7, and so I kind of kludged here, and for some reason it's insisting on making it really large. Anyway, I ran out of space, so I actually have a windowsill, and you can see me I put it on the windowsill sideways, and it's actually got little feet on the side. And you might have noticed if you looked at the R2R7 review video really carefully. And anyway, that's how I've been listening to the R2R7 before I ship it off to another guy who's going to do much more with it than I can. So that's a little bit of fun I've been having. There we go. I'll stick that in there. That's one way to place a DAC if you need to. So the only problem is if you have to change inputs, it's a big pain in the butt because I have to get out of my chair. But oh well. Anyway, thank you everyone for joining me today. We have a lot of questions to get through. As you can see, if you read the description already, I've had a massive number of questions. So first I've got to thank you to all my patrons. I've had a nice increase in patrons recently. It would have been honestly impossible to continue. It may have been completely impossible to continue doing reviews and even written reviews without everyone's help, without everyone's support. It's actually made a huge difference to my being able to actually, I've had various work choices I've had to deal with lately, and one of them is I work part-time, but I have multiple part-time jobs. And one of the tricky things about living in Japan is there's two ways to go about it. You can either get one big full-time job, which is extremely risky because for foreigners, no matter what kind of job you get, they can suddenly decide, we don't like our foreigner, we don't need our foreigner anymore, let's just turf him. But if you have a full-time job, that can kill you. If you have multiple part-time jobs, well, if one turfs you, it's not so bad, but it's kind of then you have to juggle everything around. And so I've gone for the latter, but I was aiming for the former to go full-time. But if I'd gone full-time, there'd be no more video reviews. So actually your support has made a huge difference in that, has made it possible to go ahead. Anyhow, so in that vein, I have everyone who signed up in time for the June is in this, their name is in this basket and little tiny bits of paper which are folded up. And so, actually I just realized something very important is I haven't decided what I'm going to give away yet. So this is going to be a mystery random item from my cupboard. I actually don't have anything sitting around immediately. So someone is about to get a random object from my cupboard. Literally, I've got a lot sitting in there. I can't even think of where to begin. What you might get. So it might be a pair of headphones. It might be a USB thing, it might be an amp, who knows, but you're going to get a mystery item, so sorry about that. I want to try and get this started by 10:30, and of course I failed in that. And so I'm just going to draw a name out of the basket, so you can see that there. And this person is going to win, if I can actually get hold of a piece of paper, make sure that's just one piece of paper. They win a random item out of my cupboard, once I found something that I can fit. Okay, and the name I have drawn is, and I hope I pronounced this correctly, Saeed Gamdi. If I pronounce that wrong, please forgive me. So, Saeed, you have now won a random item out of my cupboard, which I shall contact you once I figure out what random item is sitting in there. So it could be anything. It could be headphones, it could be an amp, or it could be something like a USB thing. I don't know. We'll find out. So congratulations, Saeed, and thanks for being a supporter. And I shall contact you soon. So with that out of the way, I have a massive, I'm just looking at the screen here, a massive number of questions. And yeah, I'm sorry about it. I was trying to get everyone, for the US people, either everyone's in California and they haven't knocked off work yet, or everyone's on the other end, the New York kind of area, or that direction, and it's kind of getting late. So I try and hit in between the mark where, you've neither gone to bed but you've returned home from work. So hopefully I'm trying to rotate them around the clock for people in different areas of the world and in different areas of the US, and I'm trying to do, like for US, I guess, if I do Sunday evening my time, it's Sunday morning your time, and I don't know, maybe reasonable for some people, but we'll see how we go anyway. So I want to get through the questions before my voice dies. Now, I was going to do this live stream yesterday, but I had a headache a massive headache. I'm not sure why. It could be just a freaky weather thing because everyone had headaches here. So I just didn't want to try and even do a live stream then. So Michael M has written up a massive question list, which I shall go into. And thanks, Michael, for the bunch of questions. They're very interesting. So his first question is, and you can see down in the description if you miss it, for amps that are capacitor coupled like the Soundaware P1, what is the practical life in years for the main capacitors to maintain good sound quality? I presume they would degrade over time and the sound quality would degrade as well. I think after, like, I don't know about all kinds of capacitors. I think it was electrolytic capacitors that had to be replaced. So if you get old amps which are like more than 20 years old, as far as I know, some capacitors, you have to look inside. If the capacitors are bulging, then they're due for replacement. Or if you get any weirdness in maybe the performance. But as far as I know, some old capacitors will bulge and then need to be replaced, but not all capacitors would do that because not all capacitors are, I think it was electrolytic capacitors that were the ones that had to be replaced. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. But you know, there are various types of capacitors, and some, you know, like I think it was paper in oil capacitors. Some of the, you know, the old Russian capacitors. Some people like putting in amps. They will last, you know, like many decades. So it's not. I think I'm not quite sure what capacitors that the Soundaware uses, but they're very high quality ones. They could probably last, you know, they might even last 40 years. I'm not sure. So that's something worth looking into. But generally, in amps in general, all amps will have some kind of capacitors that may, after, you know, say 20 years, need replacement. So you can think of it like if you have a good amp, you may need after 20 years to service it in some degree, and that's probably very probable because, you know, some device or another may wear out. So, but I don't know about exactly what happens if the sound degrades. I guess it does, you know, with the capacitors losing their ability, depending on the type. But I don't think the main capacitors, if they're the kind I'm thinking of, would need replacement. What are your thoughts on volume pots versus stepped relay attenuators versus DAC digital volume control? How do they rank in terms of sound quality? Well, someone did a test to see if digital volume control had any negative effects and couldn't make out any effects. I mean, every kind of volume pot will degrade the sound very tiny bit. And I think stepped attenuators were supposed to be the minimum with things like the Alps, you know, the top of the line Alps pots, which, you know, like cost $1,000 a piece, being second to that, like you get in a Blue Hawaii, or optionally in a Blue Hawaii. And the regular pots, you know, like the cheaper pots from the Alps, will have, you know, the very start of the movement will have a little bit of channel imbalance, and the very end of the movement will have a little bit of channel imbalance, and somewhere in the middle, like the idea was to stick it at, if you're a question that I think you asked later to do with, or someone asked about preamps to do later, you know, what's the optimum volume position, and probably it's about the 12 o'clock position, or it was 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock was the optimum volume position for most pots to avoid channel imbalance. But it depends on the kind of volume pot. Like a stepped attenuator is just like got multiple switches. It's basically switching between a series of resistors, and there are even ones you can buy without any resistors, and you can do your own, you know, gain depending on what resistors you buy. So the stepped attenuator is probably, or relay stepped attenuator, like you get in, say, the Audio GD gear or Shit Audio, the Ragnarok. The stepped attenuator, the relay attenuators are also supposed to be very high quality because they're basically switching in and out resistors. So I think the main thing is channel imbalance, but there have been discussions about, say, the Alps blue pots and the Alps green pots, you know, adding a bit of, you know, distortion to the sound, you know, very tiny bit. There were digitally controlled analog volume chips, and there was, I remember the Pico Slim. The head-amp Pico Slim had one which was generated a very slight amount of noise, and you could make out that it was very slightly tiny bit harsher to listen with than, say, the Pico Power, which has a regular volume pot. But there was someone else was using digitally controlled the IFI XDSD used a digitally controlled digitally controlled volume chip, I think. But it doesn't seem to add any noise or distortion in there. If it does, I don't know about it. I don't know what one there is, or if there's multiple models. So generally, lowest level is your basic Alps or cheap Alps pots, blue and green, and then up there's higher quality versions of those supposedly. And then up from this kind of stepped attenuators, digitally controlled relays. Digital volume, that's why a lot of DACs, I think, or the DACs which have that in there, use a 32-bit circuit, so that and they use software to dither the volume so that it produces the minimum amount of distortion possible. So generally, there's very, very little in it. And I think you'd have to be going on a digital volume control turn almost all the way down before you'd notice any likely distortion or degradation in sound. So probably, yeah, the digital probably might have the advantage versus a stepped attenuator. Probably both are going to be fairly up there. I take it as far as I know from my knowledge of audio. Anyway, if you're using your HP amp with a preamp for volume control, well, this is the same thing. Should you put the volume pot or a stepped attenuator max or some other setting? So 12 o'clock was supposed to be the ideal. Although if it's a stepped attenuator, it won't matter. Each step will be fine. You probably just leave it at the maximum. Maybe it depends what volume control you want to use. If I have a preamp which doesn't have a remote and uses a stepped attenuator and it's down there, and I have some kind of DAC that's near me with a digital control, whatever, that might be more convenient. So it just depends. What's convenient in the end. And again, it's at the very start and the very end of some volume pots you get channel imbalance, so that could be troublesome. So you just want to avoid that mainly. Let's see, if your DAC, has digital volume control, so that we've just answered that. Well, that's, again, Shit and Audio and Audio GD both use relay controlled stepped attenuators, so it kind of bypasses the need for caring about digital volume controls. The other thing about using those is you can use remote control very easily, because you're just usually, the remote controls are digital and they're just switching in relays. Chord Dave plus choice of amp plus top of the line headphone of choice versus Chord, Q-Test, Hugo 2, Blue Hawaii SE, top of the line stacks, Mr. Speakers, Voce. What do you think would be the difference in sound between these 12 to 15K dynamic planar electrostatic systems? I don't know. I want to get the Voce in there and listen. I want to get the stacks in there and compare them to the Voce and other electrostats if they're available. That'd be really cool. It's just very hard to say without having them in here with the experience. So, how many years do you think it would take before Chord Dave performance level DAC is available at the 2K price point? It depends. Most of it, like the Mojo, came about because this is what Rob Watts said. He said he came about specifically because, John Franks asked him, can he make something that's smaller at a certain price point? And he goes, that's kind of impossible. We don't have the FPGA for it. And then he gets home, gets an email saying there's a new FPGA out, and it fits the bill, so he can make the Mojo. So it depends. He's trying to make an M scaler, and someone asked about the M scaler as well. And I'm going to jump to that question as well. I'll talk about the M scaler. The idea is the smaller the FPGA, lower power an FPGA can be made with equal computing ability, the smaller the devices can be. So it just depends on waiting. Rob Watts is just waiting for more new FPGAs to come out to what it can do. And the problem with the M scaler is it uses so much power and generates so much noise, he couldn't stick it inside a Dave. So the M scaler, I'm not an expert in digital. I just know enough. I know enough to know enough. But the idea is, and this really needs a diagram. Okay, if you imagine, the sine wave of a particular frequency. In normal digital, it's sampled, so many times per second that it is, has so many volume levels that the samples can be set at so many bits. So, which account to 16-bit is 65535 different volume levels, and 24-bit is something in the millions, I forget. And the idea is, to produce a perfect sound wave, as you get to, say, towards 20 kilohertz, you're getting down to, only just over 2 samples per wave. And the idea is, that to have more, to reproduce the analog signal as close to a real analog signal as possible, and he reckons that with the M scaler he genuinely can completely reproduce a 16-bit signal. But you think, but other DACs can reproduce 16-bit. No, but actually they're not. They're using trickery to try and roughly reconstruct it. But he actually genuinely believes he is 100% reconstructing a 16-bit signal with nothing, absolutely nothing lost, using the M scaler, which shows the amount of computing power that he reckons it's necessary to genuinely reproduce an analog waveform from digital. So I mean, the Nyquist theorem assumes that you have infinite taps or infinite, reproduction points, which infinite means, the original sound, because the infinite sound doesn't have points. So, the idea of the M scaler is just basically, use a bigger hammer factor. It's just using more and more and more computing power, more taps instead of, the, what was it, the 16,000 of the IDSD. Hugo 2 is 50,000, what was the Dave was 100 and something thousand, a million, is to get closer and closer and closer to the original reproduction of the music. And to do 24-bit, you reckon you probably need something like a room-sized computer to do it. It's just crazy. And yeah, it's kind of complex, but it's just essentially trying to get closer and closer to the original waveform from digital by using very complex calculations, and they're just using more and more and more calculations to get more and more accurate. And it seems to work. I mean, listening to a Chord Dave, I mean, it made you feel, the kind of feeling you get when you're listening to a live singer. That had that feeling, which was, you go to a live performance, but you come back and listen to it, and it doesn't feel as real. But the Dave has had that kind of feeling of making it feel more real. So that's, I mean, it's just about trying to get digital to actually reproduce analog as genuinely as accurately as possible. So. Number 6, what type of things will get you banned on Headphone? Being repeatedly abusive over a long period of time and repeatedly trolling, and that's a really funny thing about Headphone. Is, sorry, I haven't watched any of the chat if anyone's been messaging. Is, I think this is a problem in society in general, is that people gravitate towards negativity and gravitate towards fear. So, and it actually, I connected right through even to flat Earth discussion. So there's this common thread of ideas that there's a conspiracy. The people in charge are conspiring. The people in charge can be the government. People in charge can be some illusionary group. People in charge can be the head of a website. The people in charge can be, whoever you like. And so they become, the head of the conspiracy, even if they're not doing what they've been said to be doing. It's people want to believe the conspiracy, and so whether it be flat Earth stuff, whether it be, I've met schizophrenic people who believe the government is after them, whether it be modern, don't want to even go into it, postmodernism, which is a variation of the same thing. It's all that, like, the people in charge, or the people at the top are corrupt or evil or whatever, and we should just get rid of all this stuff. And I was talking to a guy who came into the thread about the shit audio Yggdrasil impressions thread on Headphone, and I started a new thread because I thought, this is rubbish, we may as well just start a new. I'm going to start a new thread. That was not anyone else's idea but mine. And to clarify that, there was no they involved, me. And I talked to a guy who was like, what does it take to get banned around here? Was it something he posted? And he wanted to martyr himself so he could say, I was banned for criticizing sponsors. And so it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's like, it's the same thing like you're driving a car and the car in front suddenly stops. You go, oh crap, I'm going to hit the car in front, and bang, you hit the car in front. Because that's your fear and that's your focus. Whereas a sensible, experienced driver will just drive or, swerve or whatever. And I've been in cars with professional truck drivers, and people have been, doing this stuff for years, and they don't hit the back of cars that stop suddenly, whereas the ordinary person does. It's sort of like you accidentally go off the road and go, oh no, I'm going to hit a tree, so you drive into a tree. And it's, people drive towards their fears and drive towards these things. And this guy wanted to be banned so he could say, oh, I was banned for criticizing a sponsor. And I said to him, oh, really, do you think Headphone actually deletes criticism of sponsors? And he goes, yes, yes, he does. Well, he doesn't now, because I pointed to him to like a dozen threads which you can visibly see are massively critical of sponsors. There's, let's just say, original Sennheiser HD800 thread. That is just brutal at criticism of the product that hadn't even been released. There was a whole thread criticizing the use of plastic for the flagship headphones, for the Sennheiser HD800, which was very interesting, actually. Number of threads about Odyssey driver failures. They've been going on for years. We're still active. What else is there? Hi-Fi Man. Need I say more? Don't even get me started. FIO X3. I mean, I knew people who wanted to smash them. FIO, talk about a company that's gone through trial by fire and fought their way out of it. You know, the early FIO, every single DAP that they made has been ripped to shreds. You know, when there's been this problem, you haven't got this, you haven't got that feature, this is broken, this is not working. You know, they've been hammered. And so, really, I mean, holy heck! I mean, if it's like sponsors are actually, you know, afraid of some will not participate on the forums because they can't hack, they don't want to deal with it. And you know, some who came in and sponsored and posted just couldn't hack the crap they got. You know, at all, from people. So, you know, protect your sponsors, you've got to be joking. It's nonsense. People get banned for being abusive. And, you know, as someone who was admin for a long time, I ban people who are just, you know, you tell the mods to F off, well, you're going to get banned. You start mention lawyers, don't even bother. You're gone, not even going to start. People who scam others, you know, the various scammers who got banned, and who else was there? Just, you know, people who signed up again and again and again. And it's interesting, the signing up again and again and again is that the worst people were the people who just kept coming back and back and back, and they used every trick in the book to come back and scam people and whatever. And it seems like on social media that there are groups of people who are extremely noisy and extremely persistent, and they may have many different usernames, but they cause the most trouble and the most consternation online. And it's the same on forums, and so there's a theory that, you know, like they're saying that the Reddit post, so there's a discussion somewhere about Reddit posters, probably the same group of very noisy, irritating people who cause 90% of the crap to be posted. I'd say it's probably very likely true, given now decades of running online communities. It's always the same people. It's the same really noisy and irritating people. But anyway, so there's the answer to that. What else do we have? Okay. Oh, and hello. No, I don't know how to pronounce it. M-A-E-L-O-B, Malob from Hawaii. And Oahu. Yes, I hope everything's good. I hope you haven't been affected by I've been watching the volcanoes down there. I've been following the events down with the volcano and the people who are displaced. And very sad to see that. I actually have friends in Hawaii, in various parts of Hawaii. So, and I visited there a couple of times. So that's quite fascinating, but terrible to see. You know, people who built all these, settled down on a volcano, admittedly, and their homes were wiped out. But anyway, yep, and indeed. So as Kishore just said, the petty behavior in the original Z1R launch thread was ridiculous. So I mean, exactly. They all get hammered. I mean, the sponsors just get hammered. You've never seen almost rarely seen a Sennheiser rep post there, for example. And there were two. I think there's just one now. I'm not sure. Anyway, can you explain? Dan E asked me, can you explain the headphone amping requirements? For example, Odyssey LCD3 suggests 1 to 4 watts of available power, but this seems to be somewhat deafening and lethal by my calculations. What am I missing that would help me make sense of the thing? Well, okay. Some history. Back when the LCD2s came out, there were no planers available. They were like the first mainstream planar headphones that will not, you know, like the old Yamahas, which were like from way before. Now, most high-end headphones were Sennheiser HD600s, 650s. We can't really include, I don't know if we can really include the Ultrasound Edition 9, that's a special case. Sennheiser HD800, so everything was geared towards high-end headphones being high impedance, and so high voltage swing, and so the amps didn't need much power. I mean, they needed very minimal power. So when planers came out, they required very high current. So what was happening is people were buying these things and they're saying, oh, they sound really blurry, and you know, because they couldn't, the amps couldn't output the current, needed to keep the drivers in check, and the output impedances were too high, and all sorts of issues like that. So it was a general rule of thumb, and this is they should probably change their advice now. It was a general rule of thumb that if you had an amp designed with like a watt or more of power, which was unusual back about 9 years ago, if you had an amp with that kind of output power, which is, you know, very low basic speaker power almost, then you would probably be all right with them with the LCD2s or LCD3s or what have you. So it was generally old advice to go for anything which had ridiculous power output. Now power output is kind of tricky, and I'm not an expert in amps, but you can have some amps, or a lot of amps are what's called Class A up to a certain point, which is where they're using, you know, pretty much 100% of their power 100% of the time. And then after a certain amount of power output, they become Class AB. So you have the Class A power and then the Class AB power, because above a certain amount of power, it's to do with the circuit, and again, it's something above my understanding, so I don't know entirely about it, but I know enough. So for example, some of the Luxman amps you can buy, well, not headphone amps, but speaker amps, they would only list the Class A power maximum, which looks very low. It's like 50 watts or something like that, which looks like nothing. And then, but actually their full Class AB power goes up to, like, say 200 watts or something like that. But a lot of amps would use an amp which would only had a bit of class. They'd say it's a Class A amp, which it was, but it would only go Class A up to a certain power. Then it was Class AB. So a lot of amps are actually like that. So, but you know, it'd be enough for planers. But I mean, I think maybe you lose a bit of dynamics if you're listening at high volume, but it's kind of irrelevant. But the main thing is they had enough power for planar headphones. So nowadays, you know, there's stuff with 500 milliwatts which will power planers, and a lot of planar headphones which are sensitive enough, say, to be powered out of, say, even a smartphone. So it's not so much an issue nowadays. But for best results, I mean, if you're spending, you know, close to $2,000 on a pair of headphones, you want a good amp anyway. So the idea is probably something with high power is likely to be better quality than you know, and give you a better result than something that's kind of, you know, like plugging it into your phone, obviously. So that's the kind of thing about that. But you're not going to use that power. It's more so that and it probably will be that you'll only be using the Class A power, but it will stay within Class A for listening volumes, which will probably give you the best performance results anyway. So no, indeed, it's nothing to do with the actual total power output. It's more to do with the circuit design, and it will be enough that even loud peaks, short loud peaks, will be conveyed really, really well. So anyway, yeah, amps are a complex thing, which anyhow, so Chet, considering the wide variety of differences between different components, is there any sort of method you can recommend for finding a weak chain in one system without comparing a wide variety of different DACs, amps, and headphones? No, I don't think there's any particular methodology. Probably kind of very generally, very roughly speaking, you know, if you have, say, a $500 DAC and you have a $4,000 amp, well, probably the DAC's going to be the weak chain. So I don't want to say price, because it's not entirely true, but to a large degree price. Probably generally speaking, stuff in the same kind of price range will perform roughly the same. Although now stuff that's even quite cheap now performs really, really well. Or you might have something, you know, I mean, admittedly you can hook up an ODAC to a nice USB power supply and you can get pretty good results with that, even though technically it is a piece of crap DAC. For most intents and purposes, it should be okay. And I've tried this. I tried it with a friend's ODAC. So, but you know, if you have really expensive gear, you know, like again LCD3s or something like that, you're going to notice the difference between even doing that and, you know, a good, say, $1,000 plus DAC in a lot of ways. But yeah, it's a complex thing. So probably at the moment, my general experience is components roughly around the same kind of price point make a difference. Though below $500, there's a lot of, say now, as I said, cheap Bluetooth things, which I talked about previously, which are actually incredibly good sounding. So yeah, so it kind of gets blurry down there as the quality of even inexpensive components has improved vastly. And then of course it requires good music to notice the differences. Anyway, Saeed, and was that the same guy? Oh, it is the same guy who I drew, Saeed. So the same guy whose name I just drew, which is really nice. What is your testing? I should correct the grammar on this. What are your testing tracks, and what's your favorite music tracks you listen to all the time? My testing tracks, I don't remember if I shared it, was a playlist called Number 82, which is, I just make a new playlist and I increment the number. So it goes back to number 1 when I first came to, and I had a whole bunch in Australia, and I had my first one when I came to Japan was in 2006. So 82 is how far we've come. Although I think the numbering got screwed up a bit in the middle. But first there are a few I use, for example, Santana, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it, Oye, como va? And that's just kind of I'll immediately know, get a general idea about a pair of headphones or something from that. It's pretty punchy, it covers a fair frequency range. It covers enough to know I can get a pretty quick idea of what a pair of, say headphones are like. Then, I have things like for bass tests, I have Angel by Massive Attack, which goes down fairly low. I have Sophie Tucker, which is kind of the usual mid-bass, mid-bass techno kind of stuff. And then I had something by the New Basement Tapes, which has this very low rumble that gives me an idea where the deep bass goes. So it's actually 3 bass tracks. Then testing for other stuff, I use, it depends, whatever really, really nice acoustic track I have at the moment. At the moment it's the Wailing Jennies, which is really nicely recorded. I'll run some binaural through to see, check the imaging, from some of the Chesky binaural. Although the problem with some of this stuff is it just sounds so good anyway. It just sounds good on everything. So you have to kind of listen for cues. I might Friday night in San Francisco, with the 3 legendary guitarists. I'll listen for, like, say, how resolving the guitar plucks. Do I hear the note decay, which I only do on the Hugo, properly on the Hugo 2 so far, and probably greater than that. So that gives me kind of a variety. I listen to piano. How well do I hear piano note decay? Do I hear the harmonics of the decay and all that kind of thing? Use that for DAC comparisons. What do I listen to at the most now? It varies. So some days I'll be listening to Spongle, and then some days I'll be listening to classical music. It just depends. I'll just cycle around stuff I like, or I'll find new stuff people will link me to. And then I listen to streaming radio. I listen to Radio Paradise, which is a listener-supported streaming radio. They have FLAC available if you use their iPhone app. I think the Android app supports FLAC download as well. And then I cache, 5 hours of that and play in the car, and then I'll hear some music, and there's a rating thing, and I'll rate it maybe high, and then I'll go back later into their website. It shows all my ratings, and I'll pick some music out and listen to that. And some stuff you go, oh, that sounded great in the car, and you listen to it, it's like, oh, that's a crappy recording. And then I'll just kind of cycle through stuff as I feel like. And then there's some old stuff I come back to. It varies. There's just so much now I've even forgotten, which I just really like listening to. So it's huge. If Spotify released lossless, I'd ditch Tidal and switch to Spotify, and then I'll start putting up like playlists and stuff. So I'm just waiting for Spotify to release lossless before I do that, and then I'll share more of that. So number 2 is, what is the most special audio gear headphone you saw in Japan store that is not available outside Japan? I should do some videos inside stores. I have to ask the managers. I can't just walk in there with a camera. But it's probably possible to video inside a store. The most special gear that was Japanese only were some kind of these tube amps. I've forgotten the name, but these single-ended triad tube amps, and they were modified by this guy in this shop to sound even better, and that was with a horn speaker system, avant-garde speaker system, which is Europe. And the sound was just unbelievably good. So they were really nice set amps. And I don't know if I think they are available outside Japan. I don't know stuff that's not available. There's, everything's available everywhere now. So, but I think that was a specific Japanese company. I really liked that setup. So that was my memory of that. Okay, so I've done the M scaler. Oh, we've actually gone through most of the questions already. I hope I say your name correctly, Prachaya F. Does DSD sound better than FLAC? Okay. Okay, so some DSD discussion. What the heck is DSD? So FLAC, of course, is a compressed version of PCM. So PCM, or pulse code modulation, is your standard digital. Like your CD quality, you have 16,000 samples per second with 16 bits of volume. So 16 bits equating to 65535 different volume levels, 65,535. And 24-bit equating to, what is it, so many million volume levels, which I've forgotten. And so DSD instead uses a 1-bit system where instead of the volume level versus volume level being measured many times per second, as you go along, and the volume level goes, a wave becomes many volume levels going up and down, up and down. DSD is measured by the lower the frequency, so a low frequency thing would have the DSD goes on, on, and then as where the wave would drop, it goes off, 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 and that becomes your, and then, but high frequencies go on, off, 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 on, off, off, off. So it becomes the width of the width of the wave is decided by how long the bits are on and the bits are off. So it's a different way of encoding stuff, and it has its pluses and minuses. In the regular hearing range, it is in some respects better in terms of the noise floor is lower. In high frequencies, it starts distorting massively above your hearing range. So you get stupid comments like, oh, but at 100 kilohertz, it's way above your hearing rate. At 100 kilohertz, it still has only minus 30 dBs of noise. It's like minus 30 dBs of noise. Everyone complains when I have minus 30 dBs of noise through this mic. So I mean, it's ridiculous. So people have cut off the filters. Usually in most DACs cut off 50, 60 kilohertz, which is neither here nor there, or lower 24 kilohertz or whatever. But in the free hearing range, it can be better. But transients tend to be blurred more, so it sounds softer, which some people like, but again, it's a kind of distortion. So it has its advantages and disadvantages, and I think to a degree, and this comes down to audio, like listening choices in general. I have various DACs here. I have the Hugo 2, just out of view behind the headphones. It's designed to be as accurate as possible, but traditionally as accurate as possible DACs have kind of sounded cold and harsh and what have you. And while they may have a very no noise floor, it's actually in playing back music that I think they introduce some kind of unpleasantness to the music. Whereas other manufacturers compensate that. People make very tubey amps like Woo Audio, which introduce a lot of second order harmonic distortion. They sound very euphoric. Or as I said in my R2R7 review, good old R2R7, which is now sitting behind, on the windowsill, sideways, as you do. It has a slight, in the measurements, actually there's a new R28 out, and that shows the measurements for the analog section and digital section separately, and the digital section has some very low level even order harmonic distortion, which I think the same as the R2R7, so it gives it a kind of very, very, very subtly euphoric sound, and it makes it nicer listening, but I think it loses a tiny bit of detail compared to the other DACs. So I think that comes down to good, like good set amps as well, like I heard with that setup, or vinyl as well. Vinyl is known to introduce certain kinds of distortion from the movement of the needle, which makes it sound more euphoric. Makes it sound nicer. So it's a choice between, some people, I guess DSD comes to the same thing. It softens things up a little bit. I mean, you can try it if you have an iPhone. You get Onkyo HF player and has DSD upsampling. If you have a device that can take DSD, you can DSD upsample and then play back and then compare. Especially if you have something like a Sabre DAC, you'll notice a big difference. Well, not a big difference, but a difference. It'll sound kind of softer. And some people like that. And I think because, live music sounds super dynamic, and if there's harshness in there, it can sound harsh. And I mean, I've been to performances in small venues which have just sound too harsh. And I've been to a concert where, I just thought, my first thought was, I want to hear the DVD of this concert afterwards, because the distortion of everything being turned up so loud was just unpleasant. And so, in a way, we kind of prefer, it can be nicer to listen to music when it's kind of a bit more rolled off, a bit softer, a bit gentler, a bit more euphoric. And so that's the battle between the purist that goes for the absolute accurate and the person that goes for the euphoric sound. And I think that's more what it's about. If there's anything to do with being better or worse, because PCM is technically better. But I mean, Chord's taken that third thing where they've gone, let's take the actual Nyquist to the far extreme that we can possibly take it, and actually genuinely make a high-res DAC. And the result has been actually extremely musical. So they've taken, instead of having to be a compromise between two things, they've managed to take the genuine kind of very purely objective method of producing the most accurate DAC possible. And the result has been extremely musical, because they've Rob Watts reckons he's recovered the actual, the proper timing and experience of listening to music. And my experience in listening with their DAC seems to agree with this. I still like listening with the R2R7 though. It's still really, really pleasant to listen to. I've had it powered up all overnight. I've had all this stuff powered up overnight, which is going to be horrible for my electricity bill. But And so I'm just going to have a listen today before I send the R2 R7 off. So, and it's just really, really nice combos. But with the Susvaras, again, they're very kind of, I'd say, kind of aggressive headphones, and with this very slightly euphoric system is a really nice match. So, I mean, it's not really about DSD versus PCM. It's about, you know, kind of how you like listening. So, now I've ranted for like a maniac for how many minutes? 44 minutes. Let's just go back and see what you guys have said. So, who is the biggest weasel you've ever met in the industry? I don't want to say. Not going to say, for obvious reasons. But I don't think they've... I think the vast majority of people I meet are really fantastic and are really genuine. And there's only like... Again, it's like on forums, there's just one or two people who are just really terrible. Or, you know, one or two people who just... I'd say... Well, I don't want to say deluded, because that's kind of... You know, I try to steer people away from saying that about others on forums, but... You know, you put facts to them and they can't handle it. And, you know, if someone says something to me like, oh, you screwed this up, you got this wrong, and it's like, oh, did I? Oh, I'm sorry. And because, you know, my aim for myself is to do better with stuff in the, you know, whether it be making a video, whether it be doing Aikido, whatever, the aim is to do better each time and improve your understanding, and, you know, you make a mistake where you learn something. And, you know, there are videos out there, you know, some of my videos have got mistakes in them, and I put corrections afterwards. But there are people who just can't handle, you know, being wrong or contradictory opinions. They're just, it's just, the only way I can say is they've got a mental issue with doing so, and they can't handle, say, and a certain person, you can guess who I'm talking about, who is an expert or came through, you know, worked in a very large business doing whatever it is he did, and has come out of that thinking that whatever he touches is going to be perfect, when obviously it's not, and it's deeply flawed. And, you know, you can, you know, when you're young, you know, you deal with young people online who, they just get hammered. You know, I was hammering the crap out of a 16-year-old who was behaving like a prat on chat the other day. And you can either change and improve, and these people do, you know, when you're 16 or a teenager or whatever, someone's pointed out that you should, before you're, you should be able to allowed to screw up before you're, 25 years old, and be forgiven for it because of all the stupid things you're going to do. And I completely relate to that. But, you know, when you're kind of like a person who's in their 50s or whatever, and they're still like that, it's kind of scary. So there are people who, yeah, they just can't see the wrong in what they do, even though it's like, it's just not correct. So... okay, sorry, I just had to get rid of some spam that had crept in. What are your thoughts on vintage gear? Well, it has to be specifically what vintage gear. There's some interesting headphones out there. The AKG K1000s, worth trying. If you ever have a chance to listen with them, they're really, really interesting. Although there's the My Sphere is now out, so I've got to try. They're on my list of things I'd like to review. What else is there? Try the old Yamaha planers if you can. They're very interesting too. The old little planers are really fascinating. What else was there? The old stacks are really fascinating too. It's just really interesting to listen to what was out there before, and some of it can still do stuff which sounds really, really great, and there's still some real greatness out there. Although a lot of stuff has caught up. But I think most stuff is caught up, but for old vintage gear is kind of interesting. Old JBL speakers with horn tweeters were really fascinating. I tried some old Luxman Lux Kid amps and I didn't like them at all. It was like, why am I even bothering? It varies. There's some stuff out there which is just kind of fascinating here. I don't think it's so, vintage stuff is quite so special now, but some stuff which is really freakish, really, really way out there, is kind of really fascinating to listen to old attempts to do interesting stuff with audio. So it varies. You know, here they have these shops called Hi-Fi Doll, and you can actually, they'll ship stuff overseas to you if you want them, but they have tons of vintage gear distributed amongst about 20 shops, and you get this really, really unusual stuff turns up in them, although they've got barely any space to demo them. So You sometimes get interesting things turn up which I never even knew existed. Would you recommend the HD800? Well, yes and no. So we've had interesting discussion. One of the guys who's online now didn't like the HD800s because they kind of lacked impact. So sometimes they can be really, really excellent. They sound really spacious. They're best with basically big orchestral recordings, and that they do fantastically. For a lot of stuff where you want a real intimacy, where planars really work, they aren't so good. So I can't say I don't recommend them, and I can't say I do recommend them, but it's a below the... but it's hard to say. Once I've got the focal clears in, it's going to be interesting to see how I feel about that then. The focal clears may have taken that kind of ground away from the HD800. And that way, because they'll probably have a mix of the... I'm guessing they're going to have a mix of the impact with the kind of detail. Although I don't know how they're going to compare to the HD800 in terms of detail retrieval. Well, glad you could join us and watch. I don't see the Cascades on the shelf. They are with Sean, who's Anak-chan on Headphone. He's reviewing them at the moment. What headphone are you most often drawn for pleasure, not analysing? I think the Cascades, when I had them here, I'd pick them up and listen a lot. So... other than that, yeah, I think I do share, like, the Sony kind of sound can be very fun to listen with. Although, now I have modified Z7s that are actually very close to the Cascades. So I think the Cascades were kind of it for kind of, yeah, fun listening with. But it came down to music. There was a lot of music which just, it needs the bass impact to be enjoyable. So I have a lot of music that kind of with the Utopias is kind of, or even the Susvaras can be a little bit not so, it's not resolving, hasn't got enough detail in there for it to bother with high-end headphones, and I really kind of want something more slightly artificially spacious and more punchy. So the interesting thing was, I have the Sundaras in here which are going to be reviewed soon, and I just have to shoot the review. I've got it all in my head what I want to say, and the funny thing is they're fairly flat and neutral, and for some music, of course, they maybe a little bit too kind of flat kind of tuning. So it's in Brick at the moment where I've been playing with amps, but the bass boost on the Q5 was a really nice, I plugged them in and I hit the bass boost and spot on. So I never used bass boost on anything until they got the Sundaras in, and I thought, actually this works really well. And probably the XDSD as well, that has a bass boost, so using the bass boost on that would be a nice combo too. So now, yeah, that's that kind of thing. That's a kind of fun listen. So that was really enjoyable because they're extremely smooth. They have extremely smooth treble and like high-end sounding treble, even if it's not that detailed. And but so they're really easy to listen with. Audio GD R2R1 versus R2R2. Wasn't that the difference between balanced and single-ended? I think he made versions of both, which you could choose. If you didn't have balanced gear and didn't want to use balanced gear, you would use buy the single-ended version, which just had a slightly different circuit. There's now an R28, which was like, I think he announced a day or two ago, and I was like, oh, I've got to review that. And it has the single-ended output and the balanced output have the same power output. So, hi from Singapore, hi Cloud. ZMF Dynamics. Yes, I should, well overdue for reviewing ZMF stuff. I should contact them and contact Zach and hit him up for reviewing a pair maybe. I'd like to do that. Do you like Emovativa amps? I've never owned one, so, but they seem to have a reputation for being, I guess they've done in the 2-channel world sort of what Shit Audio has done before they started focusing on ladder DACs so much, that they've kept, they OEM, I have Emotiva speakers, they obviously OEM stuff from China to their spec, they have it built, sent over, and they just try and do it as simply and efficiently as possible. So, I mean, heck, if you're doing stuff on a budget, why not? I just find some reviews online to see what people think, but if you don't want fancy, there's always some company out there who'll do stuff that's basically decent. And it was the Emotiva Airmotive 4s, which I don't think are made anymore, but they were really good for the money. Have you tube rolled with your Studio 6? Yes, a lot. I don't now. I've got a fairly neutral set of tubes in. I had some Brimars in here, which came a kind of bloomy, kind of British sound, but they kind of, I could really hear the distortion with the Utopias, which are just sitting here. And so I switched back to fairly neutral tubes, so I'm on a very neutral set. Sylvania, so we've got Fatboy, GE, and just out of view Mullard and Mullard. So it's kind of very neutral tuned at the moment. So it's tuned for detail and neutrality. So I think some people rolled all Sylvanias in theirs, and I rolled Sylvanias in at some point, but you can make it kind of sound too smooth almost. So, but it can be fun and expensive to roll tubes with, but I've kind of just settled on a set now, and I'll just stick with that. Because usually I use it for amp comparisons. I don't want anything too coloured in there. I don't want anything coloured in there at all. I use it for DAC comparisons rather. So I kind of want to know, what the difference between the level of detail retrieval is, which you might sound odd with a tube amp, but actually that's pretty detailed as an amp. R28 is Best Buy at the moment from Audio GD. Well, it looks like I think it's about $1,000, and with there's a $40 upgrade for the TCXO clocks. Now I haven't asked Kingwa how it compares to I've got to ask next how it compares to buying the R1 and NFB1 amp if you bought that combo, because he discounted that combo before. So you could get that, you get a pair of ACSS cables, and that would probably be equivalent. But then it'd probably be, I'm guessing, slightly better, because the R28 only has one transformer powering everything. So generally, the more, in Audio GD, the more bits you have powering stuff, the better the performance is going to be. But it'll be interesting to test, because everyone was asking me about the NFB1 amp, but I may as well do the R28 next anyway, because I think at $1,000 everyone's going to go, yep, that'll do. So that's my guess. And I've answered all the questions. How are we going for time? We've been here almost an hour. I signed LCD i4s. I'm well overdue to review them. I heard prototypes. I never got round to borrowing them for review. But when I heard them, the prototypes were pretty kick-ass. I was pretty impressed. I thought they might actually do, kind of exceed what was possible with regular IEMs for the most part. I mean, the sound was just fantastic. So, so far, yeah, I was pretty impressed with the prototypes. I want to hear the finals, like sit down and really listen to them. And I keep thinking to contact Odyssey, and I keep not getting around to it. I mean, there's a massive, well as the backlog of stuff here, there's a massive backlog of things I want to review, and it's now I have support. It actually looks like it's going to start happening. So while I'm here and you haven't got opinions on copper and silver, well, here's a really funny thing. Now that someone's asked me about copper and silver, this is a silver cable. It's a Moon Audio Silver Dragon. It doesn't sound bright. It's all in construction. It's not to do with copper or silver. It's all the construction. Nothing to do with the materials. May make a slight difference, but it's all in the construction. So here's a silver cable that doesn't sound bright. I figure I've heard copper cables, which cause system to sound bright. It's construction. Have you tried any gear from Box Audio designed by Project Audio? No, but I've heard the name. I'm going to have to look that up later. A good idea. If you're asking about stuff I've heard, generally if I've had experience with it, it'll be in the About page of headphone-earphone.reviews. So if you look on the site up in the top right-hand, at the top there's an About thing, and it now links to both Brucko, who you may know from Headphone, and I are writing on the site. And we each have an About page, and I usually update my About page with what I have here. It's a little bit behind, but stuff that's older, which I've listened to, you can get an idea what I've experienced with, but other stuff, no. Because I'm in Japan, it's like if I was in the US, I could go to a lot of meets and hear a lot of stuff, but because I'm in Japan, I'm very limited in what I can hear. I'm in the countryside of Japan almost. The fact is I've got the windows wide open, you probably can't hear any background noise, is because the loudest thing you'll hear is frogs croaking, which and even I can just hear actually the bullet trains in the distance because I live near over the hill there's a bullet trains, but actually I don't get to try much gear unless manufacturers ship it out, and some, like Moon Audio, kindly shipped stuff out to me, which is really, really cool. They paid for shipping both ways. This has been paid for shipping both ways, which is extremely kind because it is a beast, and which again is due for review soon once I get stacks in, which is again on my list. So yeah, anything kind of, if it's not on the about page, is very likely I won't have tried it or have any idea about it. Now, speaking of, while I'm waiting for more questions, unless that's everything everyone wants, is I have, for people who missed actually the beginning of the video, I drew one of the guys who kindly asked questions, which was lovely. Said won a random item from my cupboard, which I'm going to grab a random item because I'm kind of running behind time. And I've answered a whole bunch of questions which are in the description of this video. And I've got in at the moment, you can see, you've just probably seen the Pro IDSD, the video of that, which is now roasting hot. Yeah, I can leave my hand on there. I think if it were winter, this would be a fantastic setup because then I could roast. I actually have it power. It can actually, thing I forgot to mention in the video, you can daisy chain it. The power has passed through. So I think one power brick can power. I don't know how many you can try before the power brick would catch on fire, but I have the Pro ICANN here too, which is due for review. And this is nice and hot. I haven't switched this on yet. And I'm actually going to try it now to see how it runs when it's nice and toasty. This is nice and toasty. I have my, for those who missed, sitting behind on this arrangement is the R2R7 sitting on the windowsill, and it's this is the coolest DAC arrangement. I'm so happy to have this windowsill here. It's like it's actually perfect size, and I have little funky feet on the other side, so I can sit there. And if I were keeping this DAC here, I would actually leave it there. And if I'm keeping it through winter, because then it can heat up the window side, because it gets a bit cold, even with. Luckily, I have double glazed windows. So that's what's been going on at the moment. If anyone has any more questions, please do ask. But so far, next is coming in no particular order. I've got the Sundaras and the Soundaware P1, which are fairly basic to shoot a video of, thankfully. It's a very simple, really, really nice amp, this one. It's going to give a Master 9 a run for its money. It's a simpler design, I mean simpler, but it's really, really nice amp, actually. So, I mean, this company is really talented, and they're just not really good at making stuff for the Western market. But I think this might be a bit of a breakthrough. Hopefully, be a bit of a breakthrough for them. And I was disappointed to find out the Apex Sangaku looks like it's been discontinued. It looks like it's no longer made. This was a really nice amp. So I was comparing all the amps together, and now I have more. Now they're smaller, so I have more space, which is why the R2R7 is sitting behind. And then this beast, which I was hoping to get over and done with sooner rather than later, although I like it. It's like I need more space. I need more space to fit stuff, especially with more audio GD stuff coming. And what else do I have? Oh, I showed them, if you saw my video with Nathan. Check out the video with Nathan from Ohm Image, or Shigzao as he's known on Headphone. I did the UE Live. These are new IEMs, the new flagship. These are really kick-ass, but they're very monitor neutral, so they're not really. They don't listen to them and go, "Oh wow!" You kind of listen to them, and then they sound really smooth. But they use a cable from. Going to come to me in a minute. The unbreakable cables. Estrom line. Yep, the new Bax cable. Here's a variation of that, so I can do that with a lot of force and it doesn't break. So that will be really good. That's coming up, and more stuff probably on its way. From Massdrop will be coming up too. The beginning stuff from Massdrop to try out. So hopefully I'll go through all the Massdrop gear at some point. Is op-amp rolling snake oil? Well, snake oil is snake oil. It's not made anymore. It's kind of like tube rolling. I mean, an op-amp is an entire circuit on a chip, and every circuit will have slightly different effects on the, but there's electrical parameters to all of them, although a lot of the common op-amps for audio now have similar enough parameters that you can roll them and get away with it in most circuits. I mean, if they're removable in a design, they usually mean that they can tolerate, you know, the standard range of OPA 627 in pairs, or 49960. I forget, there's a whole bunch. I haven't op-amp rolled for ages, so, but anyway, there's a standard common bunch of op-amps. But for, you know, a well-designed circuit, it probably won't make a huge amount of difference. It might make a subtle amount of difference. When I first did it, was in this cheap $99 amp called the Zero, and there's this whole massive thread still on Headphone about it, which long dead. And it was, I think it was a cheap and nasty enough amp that it would made a difference. But in modern stuff, like I had a little amp, the name of which I've forgotten, we'd roll up amps and you could hear almost no difference at all. So usually I think there are a couple of common op amps which are now kind of so dead standard that, and if they're implemented correctly, there's almost no effect on the circuit. You know, there's no point in rolling them now anyway. But it was, you know, it's a cool thing. Some manufacturers go for offering that ability, and people roll them. There may be a tiny subtle difference in how the treble sounds. I mean, the OPA 627 has a slightly warm sound like a tube amp. I mean, it's noticeable. It's very noticeable in that. And I think Hi-Fi used a variation of that in the XDSD, so it has a that kind of warm euphoric sound. So it just is what it is. It's like it's literally putting a different circuit into the amp, so it's going to make it might or might not make a slight difference. But I mean, you know, it's something to play with. You can play with it, and it's like you know, it's, I suppose, like say, it's like buying multiple different Zippo lighters, or you know, you have a hobby, you play with stuff. That's all it is. Have you tried? Let's see, where are we at? Have you tried headamp? The headamp amps. I'm due to, actually, I should ask if Justin wants to send one over. But there's some of the new headamp gear. I knew this new amp. I should actually, no, I know the local distributor, so I might see if I can borrow them. But I'll add that to my possible list. What's a good entry high-end DAC unit? Now, what's entry high-end? What might be, probably, maybe the Audio GD units, the R2R1, possibly, might be a candidate. I'd have to try it and see. That's why I'm trying the R28. Entry high-end. I'm assuming that means you're aiming to buy, say, $1,000 or over headphones, like, or maybe even now it's about $800 or over headphones, say Cascades, Mr. Speakers, and what have you. It's hard to say now because some of the stuff that's available, even cheap, is actually pretty good, like the XDSD. So it depends on what other gear you have for what recommendation. So you know, if you have, you know, do you have Sundaras? Well, you know, you don't need anything too special. Do you have Utopias? Well, then it's going to make a difference. You know, it kind of comes down to that. Are the Audio GD amp stacks good for floor standing speakers? I've seen good feedback on them, but I haven't tried the full-sized amp, so I don't know. I've not been into speakers for so long, I'm way behind. Is the Sundara worth 500? Good question. Well, that's subjective whether it's worth it or not. I know that the Hi-Fi Man gear has, you know, it starts off at one price and then drops down. But they are really nice. I mean, they have the cleanest, not the most detailed, but the cleanest treble I've heard for quite a long time. They immediately sound kind of high-endish. They're probably, I'm probably heading towards saying yes. The only thing for me is they're a little bit creaky. But I mean, when they're on the head, they don't creak. They just clamp, and then I shake them. There's no creaking. You're going to see my review. They're a little bit less kind of dynamic and a bit flatter sounding than, say, the Mr. Speakers or the Focal LX. So, I mean, if we say they're a step down from the kind of LX and LX and Eon kind of range, well then, yeah, I don't know about worth, but we'll say they're a step down, and maybe in design and sound, and the price is a step down, so take what you will of that. And they're all metal, so I guess hopefully there's less, except for the bits of plastic, hopefully less breakable. I use a shit Gunnier GS. Would you consider that to be a proper reference DAC? I don't know. I have no experience with the Gunnier. I would like to. I don't know what a proper reference DAC is. I just don't have any idea what the terminology for that means. What's a reference DAC? I guess one that I guess a reference DAC in my mind might be something that sets, you know, a standard reference by which others are kind of judged or whatever. You know, we have things like, in a completely different line, you know, Campfire Audio's Andrometers. Well, they're a reference because everyone compares their IEMs to the Andrometers. Does everyone compare to the Gunnier? I don't know. So I just, you know, I don't know about that terminology, if that makes any sense. What's reference? You know, I guess it's something that everyone compares to, but I don't know if they do. So, do you have LX and Edition V? I don't have the Edition X V2. I borrowed them and sent them back. I may get Mr. Speakers. Which amp single-ended? I'd probably say, I mean, these things are easy to drive. There's generally not anything particularly poor nowadays in above, let's say anything from $350 above is going to be good. I just get stuff within your budget. I mean, they're easy to drive. It's going to be good listening. I don't think you're going to have a bad time, particularly listening with the you know, I have to turn the volume down on this a bit. It's because it looks like it's peaking. I don't think you're going to have a bad time. Whatever you get for $350 and above, I just buy something within your budget, and I think you'll be okay. And I mean, unless you have particular expectations, I mean, for most music, you're probably going to enjoy. I mean, if you need something that's more bass thumping, well, then it's a headphone choice issue. If you need more detail, well, then you're going to be spending more money. You know, I listen to music which has got extreme levels of detail in it, and so you know, for me, Utopias are worth it. But for 90% of the music I like, I mean, I could listen to Sundaras with no problem. So I'd say I'd say it's pretty hard to make a bad choice nowadays. You know, when I started in the hobby, it was very possible to make bad choices, and I did. But now a lot of stuff just sounds great. I mean, I just buy stuff that works for you, and it looks appealing to you, and try it and see how you feel. But yeah. What's your favorite DAC amp combo? Well, I'm going to try this new Audio GD R28 and find out and see if I like it. I mean, hopefully it will turn out to be something I can listen to and use as a reference, you know, as a standard. Well, let's see, is it something better than this or worse than this? DAC amp combo, actually the Hugo 2 at the moment, is still just on the best, except for the fact that the USB input is kind of sensitive to quality. Well, I bought a Migo cable which goes lightning to micro USB, and I plugged it into my iPad into the Hugo 2, and it sounded not so good. And I have no idea why. So I guess, you know, strange things can happen with cables. Maybe it's picking up noise. But DAC amp combos, this is really kick-ass, but I mean, of course, it's Hugo 2 kind of price as a kind of standalone unit. And again, I want to see how this Audio GD thing comes up. But the Audio GD combo units usually were pretty good as well. So we'll see is the answer to that. For a bit of DAC amp combo, maybe a DAP. Well, I've got yet to review the Q5. That's going to come up. That's pretty nice. It's cheap too. It's going to be interesting. I've just updated the firmware on it actually. Have I heard the R2R11? One of the things people ask me about is the R2R11, and I should review it as well. I had an aim to do a $350 gear comparison, you know, get a bunch of setups which are $350 and see what I like the best. So if I do that, I'll review that. But it seems to be getting positive reviews, and I think it's one of those things where the slight euphoria of the ladder DAC is quite nice to listen to. It's my guess anyway. But they've seemed to have always done well with the NFB11. Before that seemed to be kind of a standard DAC amp. So be interesting to try in the future. Have you ever tried the modded HD6XX? I didn't know there was a modded one, so there's your answer. I have no idea. But I mean, people have tried modding those things for the HD650s and HD600s for a long time. Is it really worth it to buy a quality cable or high-end cable? Well, that's an interesting thing. Headphone cables, I think, can make a bit of a difference if the stock cable is crap. So I found that it made a difference to the HD800s, and I can't go back to listening with the stock cable in the HD800s. I can't stand it. But a lot of the other headphones I've had here, the stock cable has been fine. It was particularly the HD800s and Odyssey cables that there was just the sound seemed flatter with the stock cable with the Odysseys and sounded more kind of open and dynamic with aftermarket cables. So is it worth it? Well, you know, how much you want to spend. You know, I'd still aim at spending money on better gear before spending money on headphone cables, but if it kind of makes it the icing on the cake. And admittedly, a lot of people, it just feels good. I mean, you have this big shiny thing on my headphones, and you pick it up, and I took these to show someone the other day what high-end sounded like, and they were like, wow, that's an impressive cable. And admittedly, you have to admit it, it's the audio jewelry aspect is appealing. If it makes you feel good to have one, why the heck not? Yeah, it's expensive bit of feel good, but I mean, the Utopias for me, and this was just the Utopias. I have a variety of interconnects, and I was kind of switching them around, and like maybe there's a tiny difference of stuff that I'll just use whatever. And then I actually switched in a pair, which as I did before, and I was listening with the Utopians, like, wait, there's a loss in detail there, and I hadn't noticed that on any other headphones. So I think the threshold at which cables, interconnects at least, make a difference is actually much higher than I've been thinking in the past. But headphone cables, well, if you've already got a really expensive system, of course it's going to make a difference. But if you're just buying less expensive, I'd stick with the stock cables. For most headphones are usually fine, unless of course you need a particular cable and the headphones don't come with them. But for something like, say, Sundaras, I wouldn't even think about using an aftermarket cable unless I had one handy. So that's pretty much it there. Actually, the funny thing was, I was listening with the Sony. I actually have the funky, expensive Kimber cable. Well, it's not that expensive for the Sonys. The Z7s. And I put it's actually a slightly dark, it makes the sound slightly darker. And I put the Focal, LX/clear cable on the Z1Rs, and I was like, oh, I like that better. So, and with the Cascades, it made a difference too. There was a bit of a difference from the stock cable. Stock cable was pretty good. So if I was plugging it into, say, the Hugo 2, which is, of course, very resolving, then the aftermarket cable was good. Whereas if I was just plugging it into, say, a Q5, and I wouldn't even consider using, I just use the portable cable because that's convenient. So that's kind of what I think about that. So, yeah, just whatever you feel like, I reckon. But, yep, Q5 should be coming. Once I get back, I just need to get back the XDSD, and then I'll be doing the Q5. Do you think Electrostatic is still needed for high-end? Good question. No. That's why I don't have electrostatic amps here. Not at all. It's still, this magic can be had with them. They still have a particular kind of magic, but you have to put a lot of money into something you can only use exclusively as it is. So, you can't, there's nothing you can really tweak or adjust or whatever. You're pretty much stuck. It's like you're often taking a gamble on what amp you can't. It's very hard to preview. Am I going to buy a Blue Hawaii SE? Am I going to buy one of someone's KGSS? Is it going to be HVs? There's so many different variations, and you're often taking a guess on what's going to sound all right. And it's kind of, unless you have deep pockets or a lot of time, it's kind of hard to, figure out that. It's just a lot of money. There's not really a cheap way to do stacks that's really, really good. But I don't think it's necessary. And I mean, I could say the same for doing, using the Utopias with everything. Those are an expensive investment, but I can plug them into a lot of stuff. So I don't think it's necessary, but you know, some electrostatic rigs are just unbelievable. So what other YouTube reviewers do you recommend to check out? I actually don't watch many other reviews much. Actually, the guy I like is Your Average Consumer. I've just gone blank on his name. The guy who even Apple sends him stuff. I really liked what he did. He just really was it Marsalis? I forget his name. So I'm just terrible at remembering names. But I really actually liked what he does. If I was doing this full time, I would probably just do videos like he did videos. You know, where you have multiple shots, and then I'd need someone else to, you know, I'd have like 5 cameras and one set up with a shoulder rig, and I'd have one parked here permanently, and I'd have another one parked there, and then I'd have a whole studio, you know, where I could do all this stuff. And then I'd have, which I do try and set up now, I have one above my desk to make it more efficient, but I just do the whole, you know, I'd have actually paying someone to help me shoot videos and do like he does, which is just awesome. But other people do I watch or not? Very occasionally, but I was just no particular reason. I just don't feel like watching other reviews much, because you know I spend maybe so much time talking about having to work out my own reviews. I kind of don't want to do that constantly. Just have all that, and you know, I watch stuff or read stuff to sometimes find. Like, I'll write down impressions or note impressions, and I go see if my impressions match theirs, and I go, well, that's good. They've missed something. They've pointed out something I've missed, maybe, or whatever. So there can be. Sometimes I watch or read other people's videos, but not much. Sundara review. Recommend any? I'd recommend something with a bass boost, like Q5. And the reason is they're kind of fairly flat sounding, and the bass boost kind of, you know, was nice with music, which could do with a little bit of a bass boost. So probably that and the XDSD. Favorite chain now. I'm hearing a lot about this RME actually. I've lost a message. Hold on. RME ADI. Yes, I've heard a lot about this RME. It'd be good to try it one day. Well, now the mass drop I'm due to review. So in that, I have to wait till I get the mass drop in to see how detailed it is. So that's my thought. But what headphones are you using? That's a good question. You know, how good are your headphones? So it depends on, you know, if your headphones are resolving enough to begin with. But also, is it you know, it depends on the music you're listening to as well. So it's 12 o'clock and I'm due for lunch. If there are last questions, besides the Mr. Speakers Eon, what other high-end entry-level headphones are worth checking out? Cascades. That was an easy one. Yeah, Cascades. Because they do a high-end V-shaped. They do what Ultrasound were originally trying to do, but do it better. I think anyway. Well, yeah, the LX was the other obvious one. They're kind of actually not as dissimilar as people think. They're fairly similar. The Eon Flow Open, and if you can tune them to sound they end up sounding fairly similar. Any powerful single-ended amps you can recommend? The only ones I've experienced with from Audio GD at the moment, powerful single-ended amps. Well, I mean, a lot of stuff comes out with the ability to output watts of power. So it just depends on budget, I suppose, and depends what headphones. You may not need something that's so powerful, and it comes back to a discussion I had earlier, where a lot of amps may have a list, say they list X amount of watts of power, but actually only, even though they say they're Class A, only maybe the first watt is Class A, and then the rest is Class AB or something like that. So it's not really quite so simple. It depends again. What headphones do you have? What's your aim? What are you aiming to do? Are you aiming to blast your ears out, or listen quietly, or you know? There's a lot of factors in there. You have to think. If I'm listening, like I could have, you know, this outputs 12 watts from memory. It's really necessary for Susvaras, but if I'm listening, this technically is not got enough power for the Susvaras. It outputs 1 watt, but it still outputs about 6 volts. I forget what it is. If I'm not listening loud, I can still listen fine with the Susvaras with this, and it's really nice. So it's not so much about power, but about other factors. What headphones are you aiming for? More detail? Are you aiming for impact? If you're really aiming for more impact, is it the headphones you need to change? What music do you like? Blah 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 blah. It becomes more like it's more complex than that. Thanks, Chuck. Cascade show up soon. Oh, good. Am I going to do a review of the R2R from Mass Drop? It could possibly happen. I think the drop may end before I end up getting a review out, and so, but I guess they're going to do many drops anyway, so I'll probably still do a review. I've got to talk to them about that. When the stream archive be up to watch, the archive will be up once it processes, and that should be. It takes them something like an hour to process on the stream this long. Thanks for joining me for the Q&A. Thank you. Is it Hisham? Thank you for joining me. Let's see. Next question, Jason. I recently joined Massdrop's Fostex TR00, and the Fostex connectors are very much proprietary. Would I know any third party? No, I have no idea about the Fostex connectors, which is a pain they use a proprietary one. Probably searching might reveal that it could be, if they're truly proprietary, that's going to be a pain. Then you have to wait for someone in China to copy them, as you do. If not, it might be actually a branded, actually maybe a branded connector, which you can get. So we're going to find out. Yeah, it's a pain if you have to get the connectors. Just see if any third-party cable makers have them, because usually someone will go out of their way to try and get them made. Who is that company that always turns up with third-party connectors? Just lost it at the moment. There's one of the Chinese companies that makes always comes up with third-party connectors and makes really nice cables too. Anyway, that's going to be done for me, and thank you for everyone for turning up. Thank you for my patrons for supporting me. This is entirely my ability to do live streams. I have time to do this. The ability to make more videos and do more stuff is entirely up to thanks to their support. So if you're not already a supporter, as I say, if you buy me, like if you the kind of person who buy me a drink or buy me a coffee, say like once a month or every couple of months, kind of thing, a couple of bucks can even go a long way. And if I had like half my subscribers giving me a couple of bucks, I could do stuff like fly all over the place and do factory tours and all sorts of stuff. There'd be a lot of stuff I'd really like to do, and it's been able to keep me in the hobby actually. Otherwise, I would have probably had to have bailed out. So thank you once again for my supporters, and thank you and congratulations to Saeed who's going to win a random item out of my cupboard once I found a random item to pick out of my cupboard. And I just really great. Anyway, so have a good day, everyone, and there'll be more stuff coming up for review shortly, and more stuff arriving for review. So to look out for those. And as usual, I'll see you guys online.